Tonight's episode dives into something truly bleak, the miserable life of a medieval assassin. You might think of sleek hooded killers lurking on rooftops, but the truth was a whole lot grittier. These weren't secret agents with Parker moves. They were often desperate people with no other options. Far from glorified warriors, medieval assassins were poor, frightened, and probably freezing. Getting paid to murder someone wasn't noble or thrilling, it was survival. They didn't vanish into the shadows after a flawless strike. They risked capture, torture, or death with every job. In reality, being an assassin back then meant scraping by in a brutal world where one wrong move got you hanged, not remembered. It was a job of last resort, not a glamorous profession. In medieval times, if you were trying to earn money by stabbing someone in the dark, odds are you didn't have much else going for you. Assassination wasn't some respected trade, it was the fallback of the downtrodden. Most assassins were outcasts, soldiers discarded after war, or men drowning in poverty and desperation. You didn't see nobles taking on hit jobs. They had power and hired others to do the dirty work. People who turned to killing for coin were usually already condemned by society. It wasn't about loyalty, skill, or training. It was survival. These were not master assassins with secret handshakes and cloaks. They were the kind of men nobody would miss, and nobody would protect. No matter what movies and games suggest, medieval assassins didn't go to some exclusive training academy. There were no black robes, no rooftop duels, no graceful dives from towers. If you were going to kill someone, you learned how the hard way, through fear, instinct, and experience. You didn't grow up dreaming of being an assassin. You were driven to it by circumstance, not ambition. Real assassins were scrappy and scared, often botching their missions or getting caught. Most didn't live long. There were no fancy weapons or escape plans, just a knife, maybe poison, and a prayer you wouldn't die right after doing the deed. Becoming an assassin wasn't a career. It was a gamble. One of the few historical examples of organized assassins was the Nizari Ismaili sect, what we now call the Hashashin. These weren't drugged-up maniacs, as medieval rumors suggested. They were deeply committed religious followers who used assassination as a strategic tool when war wasn't an option. They targeted powerful enemies, striking with shocking precision. But they weren't superheroes. They used deception, dressing as servants or holy men, to get close to their targets. Killing was usually up close and brutal. Once the job was done, escape was rare. Often, they expected to die and were considered martyrs. Their effectiveness sparked wild legends, but their reality was harsh, calculated, and deadly. While the Hashashin had some structure, most assassins in medieval Europe worked alone or in small groups. They relied on trickery to get close. Disguises, false identities, bribed guards. The tools of the trade were basic: a dagger, maybe some homemade poison, and nerves of steel. Distance kills were too risky and unreliable. Up close meant messy and personal. Assassins might hide in churches or parties, waiting for the right moment. When they struck, the shock was often as important as the kill. But most of them didn't survive long after the attack. Killing someone important almost guaranteed a gruesome death. If caught, they weren't just executed. They were made examples of in horrifying ways. Assassins needed more than just courage. They needed to disappear after the job. But escaping wasn't easy. Killing someone high-ranking usually meant you'd be tackled or cut down within minutes. Sometimes, assassins were so committed to their cause that survival wasn't even the goal. Groups like the Hashashin praised their agents as heroes even if they died immediately. Their names were honored, their sacrifice glorified. But make no mistake, for every assassin who got close enough to strike, dozens failed. The streets were filled with people looking for traitors, spies and killers. Getting in was hard. Getting out alive was nearly impossible. Poison was the medieval assassin's best friend, or worst enemy. It was easy to get wrong. Dosage, timing, and delivery all had to be perfect. Too little, and your target just got a stomachache. Too much, and they died too soon, before the plan was in place. Assassins might hide poison in wine, food, or even candles, but there were no second chances. If you slipped up, the consequences were brutal. And poisons themselves weren't precise tools. Medieval knowledge was limited, and some poisons took days to work. During that time, suspicion could grow. Some assassins were caught before the poison did its job, tortured into revealing who sent them. Even when assassins succeeded, payment wasn't guaranteed. The people who hired them were often just as dangerous as the targets. A noble might promise gold, only to betray the assassin once the deed was done. Why risk being blackmailed when you could silence the killer forever? In that way, being an assassin meant working in a world of constant lies. You couldn't trust your clients. You couldn't trust your allies. One wrong move, or even one right move, and you might wind up with a knife in your own back. It was a dangerous game, and the rewards rarely matched the risk. Being paid in full was rare. Being paid and surviving was almost unheard of. Punishment for assassination was deliberately gruesome. Authorities wanted to send a message. Don't even think about it. Captured assassins could expect torture, humiliation, and public execution. They might be drawn and quartered, burned alive, or hanged and left to rot. The Pazzi conspirators who killed Giuliano de' Medici in 1478 were butchered by angry mobs. Others were hanged from windows or dragged through the streets. If you were caught, death was certain. What varied was how painful it would be. Medieval justice was not kind, and the spectacle was part of the punishment. The goal wasn't just to kill the assassin, it was to make an example. Some assassins were doomed from the start. In cases like the killing of King James I of Scotland, retribution was swift and severe. The lead conspirator, Walter Stewart, was captured and put through hell before he died, literally. His torture involved burning flesh, disembowelment, and worse. It wasn't enough to punish him. Authorities wanted to erase him body and memory. This was the fate of many failed assassins. They didn't just lose their lives, they became cautionary tales. Anyone watching would think twice before picking up a blade for hire. The message was clear: if you go after the crown will crush you in return. Forget Hollywood. There was no Assassin's Guild with secret codes and cool gadgets. In Europe, assassins operated in the shadows without recognition or respect. They were lone wolves or small-time thugs, not revered professionals. No badges, no networks, no training camps. Just desperation, a blade, and maybe a disguise. Killing for money was seen as cowardly, not clever. If you were known to be a killer for hire, people avoided you, not out of respect, but fear and disgust. You couldn't brag about your work. Most killers died in anonymity or were remembered only through execution records. There was no glory, no legend, just silence and shame. In contrast, the Hashashin were more organized. They followed a central authority and had a system of beliefs that justified their violence. Living in mountain fortresses like Alamut, they trained not just physically but ideologically. Their missions were precise, their targets carefully chosen. But even their infamy couldn't save them forever. When the Mongols came in the 13th century, they wiped out the assassins' strongholds, bringing the group's bloody reign to an end. The castles were burned, the killers slaughtered. The methodical killings that once terrorized rulers across the Middle East became a memory, one erased by fire and sword. The job of an assassin wasn't only dangerous, it was lonely. These weren't celebrated warriors or noble knights. They lived on the edges of society, often sleeping in barns or hiding in alleys. They had no guild, no union, no comradeship. When the job ended, there was no applause, only more fear, more running. And even if they managed to escape justice, they could never return to a normal life. Trust was impossible. Friends might betray you for a bounty. Lovers might turn you in. The people who hired you could decide you knew too much. In this line of work, staying alive was never guaranteed. And neither was staying sane. Let's shift gears now and travel back even further, to the ancient world. We're heading to the court of Macedon, where political power was just as deadly, and the drama even more intense. Enter Olympias, the fierce and controversial mother of Alexander the Great. She wasn't your average queen. Olympias wasn't just a woman beside the throne. She was a force behind it. Her influence shaped one of history's most famous conquerors. Her story is filled with ambition, betrayal, murder, and myth. She's been called everything from a devoted mother to a venomous schemer. And, depending on the day, both descriptions could be true. Olympias was born in Epirus, a small kingdom known more for its rugged mountains than royal prestige. But fate and politics brought her into the Macedonian royal family when she married Philip Sevai. It wasn't exactly a love story. Philip had several wives, and court life was filled with rivalry and suspicion. Olympias stood out, though, not just for her intelligence, but for her deep devotion to religion. She embraced cult rituals, especially those honoring Dionysus, and was rumored to sleep with sacred snakes as part of her ceremonies. Whether or not those rumors were true, they added to her mystique and her reputation as someone not to be crossed. Olympias didn't just play the part of queen, she knew how to play the game. In a world where kings had multiple wives, every woman in the palace had a child who might one day claim the throne. That made things dangerous, especially for mothers. Olympias understood that the best way to protect Alexander was to outmaneuver her rivals before they could strike. She wasn't passive. She watched, planned, and waited. When Philip married a younger woman, Cleopatra Eurydice, it wasn't just an insult, it was a threat. That new wife could give Philip a pure Macedonian heir, putting Alexander's future in jeopardy. Olympias didn't take it lightly. At Philip's wedding to Cleopatra Eurydice, tensions exploded. During the celebration, one of her relatives publicly hoped she'd give Philip a legitimate son, a comment that implied Alexander wasn't one. It enraged both mother and son. Alexander stormed out. Olympias left the court. This wasn't just family drama, it was political warfare. Just a year later, Philip was assassinated. Though historians still debate who ordered the killing, many suspected Olympias. She had motive, opportunity, and a fierce desire to see her son rule. Whether or not she gave the order, she certainly made moves in the aftermath that changed the course of history. With Philip dead, Olympias acted quickly. Cleopatra Eurydice and her baby daughter were immediate threats to Alexander's claim to the throne. Olympias eliminated them. Some sources say she drove Cleopatra to suicide after murdering her child. Others say both were burned alive. Either way, The message was clear. There would be no rival heirs. Olympias secured Alexander's place by removing any competition. It was brutal, but effective. In the world of Macedonian royalty, mercy was weakness. Her son became king without challenge, and Olympias made sure everyone knew who had cleared the path for him. She didn't ask for power, she seized it. Even after Alexander claimed the throne, Olympias remained a looming presence in court politics. Though she wasn't physically with him during his campaigns, she sent frequent letters, some full of advice, others demanding action. Alexander reportedly joked that his mother charged him rent for being in her womb, and that one emotional letter from her could undo the work of his regents. Their relationship was complicated. He respected her, maybe even feared her, but didn't always agree with her. Still, he never ignored her. While he conquered the world, she ruled the kingdom in his name, and made sure no one forgot whose mother she was. Olympias had enemies, especially among Alexander's generals and regents. She clashed with Antipater, a powerful figure left in charge of Macedon while Alexander was away. Their rivalry became so intense that she withdrew to Epirus for a time. But Olympias never stayed out of the picture for long. After Alexander's death, the power vacuum sparked chaos. Olympias returned, aligning herself with Polyperchon to protect her grandson's claim. When she marched back into Macedon with an army, her presence was enough to make some enemies surrender without a fight. She wasn't just the king's mother anymore. She was a queen in her own right, and a dangerous one. Olympias didn't just come back to watch history unfold. She took control of it. In 317 BC, she defeated her rival Adia Eurydice, the wife of Philip Athuri. When the dust settled, Olympias captured both Philip and Adia. What came next was vicious. Philip Athur was executed, and Adia was forced to take her own life. Some say she was mocked before being handed a sword. Olympias then turned her fury on Cassander's allies, ordering the deaths of dozens of nobles. Her purge was thorough and unapologetic. For a brief moment, she was at the height of her power, acting as regent and protector of her grandson, Alexander IV, the last hope of her bloodline. But power earned through fear is fragile. Though Olympias had removed her enemies, she also alienated many supporters. When Cassander returned with his army, the tide quickly turned. Olympias found herself surrounded and besieged at Pydna. Trapped, cut off, and with little support, she was forced to surrender. Cassander had promised her safety, but such promises rarely meant anything in Macedonian politics. He didn't dare execute her outright. Her name still held weight, and some of his own soldiers refused to harm her. So he found another way. He handed her over to the families of those she had killed, and let revenge take its course. Olympias met her end not at the hands of a ruler, but at the hands of vengeance. A mob of grieving relatives carried out the execution, stabbing and stoning her. Some accounts claim she faced death with dignity, silent until the end. Others say she was dragged from sanctuary and butchered without mercy. Regardless of the details, her fall was dramatic. A queen brought down not by war, but by the consequences of her own ruthless rule. The boy she fought so fiercely to protect, her grandson Alexander IV, was later murdered too, ending her family's line. Her enemies had won, but her legend would not be forgotten. Olympias' story has long fascinated historians. She's been painted as both a power-hungry villain and a fiercely protective mother. Ancient writers often focused on the more dramatic details, the snake rituals, the poisonings, the vendettas. But modern scholars take a more balanced view. Olympias lived in a brutal world, where kings were killed by their own bodyguards and queens had to fight for their children's survival. Her decisions were harsh, but often calculated. She knew that hesitation could mean death. In a kingdom where power was taken, not given, Olympias played the game, and for a time she won. Even in death, Olympias left a powerful legacy. She helped shape the rise of Alexander the Great and defended his memory fiercely after he was gone. Later generations remembered her as a woman who defied the expectations of her time. She wasn't content to stay in the background. She made alliances, waged war, and struck fear into those who crossed her. Her life was filled with blood and ambition, but also vision. She understood the stakes of power and the cost of loyalty. Whether seen as a monster or a matriarch, Olympias proved one thing in a world ruled by men: she made herself impossible to ignore. Let's journey now from the world of Macedonian politics to ancient Crete, where a sprawling palace gave birth to one of mythology's most iconic legends. Knossos wasn't just a palace. It was an architectural marvel. Twisting hallways, multiple floors, hidden rooms. It felt like a puzzle made of stone. No wonder it inspired stories of a labyrinth. The layout was so complex that even locals could get lost in its depths. Centuries later, Greek visitors would whisper of a monstrous creature roaming beneath its floors. This wasn't just a building. It was the birthplace of myth, and the setting for a tale that still captures our imagination today. The Palace of Knossos didn't just feel like a maze. It functioned like one. Built layer upon layer, with no central path, it was a marvel of early urban planning. Its complexity was legendary. More than 1,000 rooms connected by narrow corridors made navigation almost impossible without guidance. Historians believe the very word, labyrinth, may have come from the double axe, the Olympias, a sacred Minoan symbol carved into its walls. To outsiders, Knossos must have felt like an unsolvable riddle. But to the Minoans, it was home and organized chaos where life, ritual, and legend all intertwined under one great roof. Knossos wasn't just about walls and corridors. It had comforts far ahead of its time. The Minoans engineered plumbing systems, drainage, even what might be the world's first flushing toilet. The palace had skylights, staircases, and spacious rooms decorated with vibrant frescoes. These weren't just practical additions. They showed a society that valued cleanliness, art, and beauty. While mainland Greece was still developing, the Minoans lived with sophistication. Their palace was alive with color and energy. Even today, wandering the ruins gives a glimpse into a civilization that thrived thousands of years ago, long before most European cultures had taken root. Among the many symbols found at Knossos, none stands out more than the bull. The creature was central to Minoan culture, appearing in art, religion, and even sport. One of the palace's most famous images is that of bull leaping, young people vaulting over the backs of charging bulls in what seems like a deadly dance. Whether ritual or entertainment, it highlights how sacred these animals were. Horned altars stood at palace entrances. Clay figures and murals featured bulls constantly. This obsession with bulls eventually fused with myth, giving rise to the terrifying image of the Minotaur, part man, part beast, trapped in a maze. The story of the Minotaur wasn't just fantasy, it likely echoed real fears and real memories. In the myth, King Minos hides the Minotaur beneath his palace in a maze so complex no one could escape. But perhaps the tale came from something more grounded, a memory of a powerful empire that once dominated the Aegean. The tribute of Athenian youths sent to Crete may have reflected real subjugation. Theseus's triumph over the beast. A hopeful rewrite of history by a rising Athens. Through myth, the Greeks processed their past, turning fear and loss into stories of bravery, freedom, and cleverness. As time passed, the myth of the labyrinth took on new meanings. It wasn't just a tale of a monster in a maze. It became a metaphor. Psychologists and storytellers began to see the Minotaur as something more symbolic, a creature lurking in the dark corners of the human mind. The labyrinth represented confusion, fear, even the struggle to understand oneself. Theseus wasn't just a hero with a sword. He was someone confronting the unknown. Ariadne's thread, a lifeline through our deepest doubts. The myth endured because it spoke to something timeless, the need to face what terrifies us and find a way out. In the early 1900s, archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans uncovered the ruins of Knossos and immediately linked them to the Minotaur myth. He saw the maze-like architecture, the bull imagery, the strange symbols, and declared this was the labyrinth of legend. Evans even named the entire civilization Minoan after King Minos. Some of his ideas were imaginative, even speculative, but many proved insightful. The palace's design truly was a tangle of halls and levels, and the religious artifacts gave weight to the ancient stories. Thanks to Evans, the world was reintroduced to a forgotten culture, and its connection to myth became clearer than ever. Knossos' rediscovery didn't just solve a mystery, it raised new ones. The palace had no outer walls, suggesting the Minoans felt secure, possibly protected by naval power. Its frescoes showed vibrant scenes not of war, but of festivals, rituals, and nature. Yet something happened around 1450 BC that brought it all to an end. Fires collapse, and possibly invasion by Mycenaeans from the mainland marked the fall of the Minoan world. Some blame a massive volcanic eruption from nearby Thera. Others point to political decline. Either way, a once great civilization vanished, leaving behind a maze of ruins and a story still half told. After the fall of the Minoans, the Greeks who later lived on Crete found the ruins of Knossos and could only guess at what had once been. The palace became legend, a mysterious place tied to ancient kings and strange beasts. Over generations, the crumbling walls and bull icons merged with myth, creating the tale of the Minotaur and the labyrinth. It was a way for the Greeks to explain the powerful but unfamiliar civilization that came before them. History turned into story, facts became symbols, and the ruins of Knossos became not just archaeological evidence, but a place of imagination and awe. Today, visiting Knossos is like stepping into both the past and a myth. The reconstructed red columns, the bright frescoes, the layered floors, they all give shape to what was once only a story. Evans may have guessed at some details, but his efforts helped people visualize the grandeur of the Minoans. Walking through the palace's narrow passages, it's easy to understand why people believed it was a labyrinth. The deeper you go, the more you lose your sense of direction. Even now, Knossos isn't just a historical site, it's a living symbol, proof of how myth and memory can become one and the same. The genius of Knossos wasn't just its architecture, but how that architecture made people feel. Winding halls, hidden staircases, and sudden open spaces created a sense of mystery. The palace was disorienting by design, not in a chaotic way, but in a way that dazzled and impressed. Visitors would have felt like they'd entered a sacred space, one meant to confuse outsiders and protect secrets. This layout likely inspired the myth of a maze from which no one could escape. The labyrinth wasn't underground. It was all around, built into the very structure of a place that blurred the line between civilization and enigma. The story of the labyrinth has remained powerful for thousands of years because it taps into something universal: fear of the unknown. In the myth, the Minotaur waits in darkness, a half-human monster representing everything wild and uncontrollable. The maze traps not only bodies, but minds. It becomes a place of trial, one that can only be escaped through courage and cleverness. Ariadne's thread is more than just string. It's a symbol of guidance, memory, and trust. The tale's simplicity hides its depth. It asks what monsters lie at the center of our lives, and how do we find our way out? Knossos continues to reveal layers of meaning. Even though the Minoans left no written history we can read, their script, Linear A, remains undeciphered. The art and architecture speak volumes. They hint at a society both sophisticated and spiritual, deeply connected to nature, ritual, and symbolism. Every painted dolphin, every bull's horn, every staircase carved into stone tells a piece of a forgotten story. We may never fully understand what the Minoans believed or feared, but through myth, we connect to them. The Minotaur legend, shaped by Greeks who inherited the ruins, keeps their memory alive in a form we can still feel. While Evans's reconstructions help the public imagine Knossos, they also spark controversy. Some archaeologists argue that he took too many liberties, rebuilding with concrete and painting murals based on guesswork. To them, Knossos today is part ancient marvel, part Edwardian fantasy. Yet others defend Evans, saying his vision brought the site to life. Without his bold interpretations, the ruins might have remained dry stones with no story. Thanks to his work, Knossos became more than archaeology. It became a cultural symbol. Even if not everything is accurate, the emotions it stirs are very real. Sometimes, myth needs a little imagination. Walking through Knossos now, one can still sense the echoes of the past. The way light filters through reconstructed skylights, the strange silence in narrow passages, the sense of being watched by painted eyes. It all combines into an experience that's part museum, part memory. It doesn't matter that the Minotaur was never real. What matters is what the myth represents: a challenge, a mystery, a journey. The palace is the maze, and as visitors explore its winding halls, they follow in the footsteps of countless others who tried to make sense of this place. Knossos remains a living question, wrapped in legend and stone. What makes Knossos so compelling isn't just its ruins. It's the emotions those ruins evoke. For all its age and dust, it feels alive. You walk its halls and wonder who lived here, who danced in these courtyards, who whispered behind these walls. The myths, the frescoes, the architecture, they're all clues left behind by a people we barely understand. And that's what makes Knossos haunting. It's not just a remnant of the past. It's a doorway to stories that still matter. Whether you're thinking about ancient rites or Ariadne's thread, the experience lingers. You don't just visit Knossos, you remember it. There's something timeless about the tale of the Minotaur. Over the centuries, it has been retold, reimagined, and reinterpreted, not just in literature, but in art, film, and psychology. It speaks to us because it's more than a myth. It's a mirror. The monster in the center of the maze is different for everyone. For some it's fear, for others it's shame, loss, or rage. But the path through the labyrinth always requires the same things: courage, clarity, and the willingness to face what's hidden. It's no wonder this story keeps returning. The Minotaur isn't just in Crete, it's in all of us. Though the labyrinth is the best known part of the myth, Ariadne is the key to its meaning. Without her, Theseus would have died like the others. She doesn't slay the monster, but she makes the victory possible. Her thread becomes a symbol of love, trust, and cleverness. Yet her story doesn't end in triumph. After helping Theseus, she's abandoned on an island, a reminder that heroes don't always repay kindness. Ariadne's role is quiet but vital. In many versions, she's later rescued by the god Dionysus, becoming divine herself. It's a myth that honors the forgotten helpers, the ones whose strength isn't in swords, but in guidance. What makes myths like the Minotaur endure isn't just their drama, it's their depth. Beneath the surface story of hero versus beast lies a web of meaning. Scholars have read the myth as a tale of political rebellion, personal growth, even puberty. The dark maze becomes a stand-in for life's uncertainties. The Minotaur, a mix of man and beast, becomes a symbol of our own dual nature, rational and wild. And Theseus's journey becomes a metaphor for facing inner chaos and emerging stronger. Each time we revisit this myth, we find something new. That's why it survives, not as a relic, but as a tool for understanding ourselves. Knossos may never give up all its secrets. The Minoans didn't leave us books or epics, just fragments, pottery, architecture, art. Yet through those pieces, and the myths they inspired, we've built a bridge to a vanished world. We may never know exactly what the labyrinth was, or who the Minotaur truly represented. But in a way, that's the point. These stories were never meant to be solved like puzzles. They were meant to be explored, wandered, felt. Knossos isn't just a place. It's a question, a symbol, a legend still unfolding. And as long as people walk its ruins, the myth continues to live. The story of Knossos and the Minotaur reminds us how myths are born, not from fantasy alone, but from memory twisted over time. When people see ruins they don't understand, their minds fill the gaps. A grand palace becomes a maze. Bull horns become a monster's head. Rituals become tales of sacrifice. That's the power of mythology. It helps people explain what they can't quite grasp. Over centuries, details shift, but the core remains. The labyrinth may never have held a monster, but it did hold mystery. And that's enough. Myths, like ruins, last because they're unfinished. They invite us to keep wondering. In many ways, the Minotaur is one of the earliest symbols of human fear. Not just fear of danger, but fear of the unknown, of what waits in the dark corners of our minds. A beast that can't be reasoned with, locked away in a maze that confuses and isolates. It's a timeless image. Even today, people use labyrinth as a metaphor for confusion and Minotaur as a symbol for inner demons. These myths don't fade because they evolve. They grow with us. They whisper the same question across generations. When you're lost in the maze, will you have the courage to face what's waiting at the center? The deeper you go into Knossos' history, the more you realize how fragile civilizations can be. The Minoans weren't wiped out overnight, but their power faded. Natural disasters, economic decline, or outside invaders, maybe all three, chipped away at their strength. Eventually, the Mycenaeans took control, and the original Minoan culture was buried under layers of conquest and time. The myths we inherited didn't just preserve memory, they reshaped it. The Minotaur wasn't just a monster. He was a symbol of a fallen age, of a civilization so advanced it seemed impossible, and thus had to become legend. Modern archaeologists continue to dig at Knossos, uncovering new rooms, frescoes, and objects. And with each find, the picture becomes clearer and blurrier at the same time. For every answer discovered, more questions emerge. What were the rituals like? Who ruled here? Why was the palace eventually abandoned? Some of the answers may never come, but that's part of what makes Knossos so captivating. It resists finality. It invites interpretation. It lets us imagine a world both alien and familiar, one where God's monsters and humans shared the same space, and the line between history and myth was beautifully blurred. At the heart of the Knossos legend lies a paradox. The more we learn, the more mysterious it becomes. We now know the palace had plumbing, multi-story buildings, and vivid art. Yet we still don't know the Minoans' language. We know they worshipped animals, performed complex rituals, and built with purpose, yet their belief system remains elusive. The myth of the labyrinth and the Minotaur gives form to that mystery. It offers a story when the facts fall short, and perhaps that's why the myth has outlived the civilization. Where knowledge ends, myth begins, not as a lie, but as a bridge to understanding. The ruins of Knossos continue to enchant because they speak in half-remembered stories. Unlike other ancient sites filled with inscriptions and chronicles, Knossos leaves us with impressions. Frescoes of leaping bulls, goddess figurines holding snakes, twisting hallways lit by shafts of sunlight. It's more dream than document. And yet, through these pieces, we can almost see the life that once pulsed here. The people, their ceremonies, their fears and joys, all etched faintly into stone and pigment. It's no wonder myths grew from these walls. When a place whispers rather than shouts, the imagination does the rest. The Minoans' apparent focus on nature and fertility in their art tells us something about their worldview. Their gods weren't warlike figures atop thrones. They were intertwined with the earth, the sea, the animals. Their rituals seem to celebrate life's rhythms rather than conquest. It's a striking contrast to later Greek culture, where gods threw thunderbolts and demanded sacrifice. In Minoan art, you see dolphins, lilies, dancers, flowing hair. It feels soft, alive. Yet beneath that beauty, something powerful clearly pulsed. These people built a civilization capable of awe and of inspiring fear in those who followed. Despite their sophistication, the Minoans remain a mystery largely because we cannot read their language. The linear script found on tablets and artifacts throughout Knossos has defied decoding for over a century. Without that key, we're left to interpret their world visually, and that's not easy. What looks like a ritual may have been a game. What seems sacred could be symbolic. We're guessing. Educated guessing, yes, but guessing nonetheless. Until Linear A is cracked, we walk through Knossos as dreamers, reading murals and carvings like fragments of a forgotten poem, beautiful and elusive. The bull, ever present in Minoan symbolism, became the perfect seed for myth. It's no surprise that later Greeks saw something supernatural in it. A people who honored bulls so intensely must have worshipped them, they reasoned. Add a confusing palace, and a beast with a man's body, and bull's head begins to make sense. At least as a story, the Minotaur wasn't just a monster. It was a cultural echo, transformed by distance and legend. The creature may not have existed, but the fears, beliefs, and memories that created it were real. Myths survive not because they're true, but because they feel true. In myth, Theseus's slaying of the Minotaur is heroic, but it's also political. It symbolizes Athens rising against Crete, ending the tribute of young victims, and reclaiming its pride. The story may have helped the Greeks rewrite history, turning an era of Cretan dominance into one of Athenian triumph. In this light, Theseus isn't just a hero, he's propaganda. The Minotaur isn't a beast, it's an empire toppled. Ancient myths often served more than storytelling purposes. They explained, justified, and rebranded the past. The labyrinth wasn't just a maze. It was a metaphor for old power finally overthrown. We often think of myths as ancient fairy tales, but they're far more than that. They were how people made sense of things: earthquakes, eclipses, the rise and fall of kings. Myths answered questions when facts didn't exist. Why did Knossos fall? Why did Athens rise? What happened to the powerful people who once ruled the seas? The Minotaur's tale, like many myths, gave structure to chaos, and because it spoke to universal fears, being lost, being sacrificed, being forgotten, it endured. That's what great myths do. They survive not because they're old, but because they're still relevant. Even now, the image of the labyrinth captivates storytellers. From novels to video games, from films to therapy rooms, the maze keeps showing up. It's become a symbol of complexity, of trial, of transformation. Inside the labyrinth, we face tests. We get lost. We grow. Whether it's Theseus with a thread or a modern character finding their way through emotional chaos, the journey remains the same. What began in the dusty stones of Knossos has become universal. That's the real magic of myth. Its ability to evolve, to speak to new generations, and to remain meaningful in every era. What's also remarkable is how the myth of the Minotaur centers on choice. Theseus didn't stumble into the labyrinth. He volunteered. He chose to face the beast, guided only by Ariadne's help. That element of choice gives the story power. It's not about fate or divine punishment. It's about action, courage, and consequences. And that's why it resonates. We all face choices that lead us into unknown territory. We all fear what we might find there. But if we're lucky, someone gives us a thread, a bit of help, a reason to hope. That's what keeps the Minotaur from winning. Over the centuries, many thinkers have reinterpreted the labyrinth myth. Froude saw the Minotaur as a symbol of primal urges. Jung saw the maze as the unconscious mind, and Theseus as the ego navigating its twists. Artists painted the labyrinth as both prison and sanctuary. Writers turned the Minotaur into a misunderstood figure, a victim, not a villain. Each version adds something new. And that's the strength of myth, its ability to stretch, to shift, to absorb meaning. The story never stays still. Like the Palace of Knossos itself, it offers new corridors to explore each time you return. Knossos, in the end, is more than just a ruin. It's a testament to creativity, to ritual, to memory. Its crumbling walls still echo with footsteps, real and imagined. The myths it sparked, the Minotaur, the labyrinth, the thread, are now part of our shared cultural DNA. We use them when we talk about life's puzzles, about emotional darkness, about facing our fears. The Minoans may be gone, but their story, half real, half legend, lives on. And as long as someone wonders what lies at the center of their own maze, Knossos will never truly be silent. Knossos reminds us that civilization isn't always built with stone. Sometimes it's held together by story. The palace itself, massive and intricate, might have collapsed, but the legend it inspired continues to grow. People don't just visit the site for history, they come for the myth. They want to see the place where a beast was caged, where a thread saved a life, where a hero emerged. These layers, the physical and the mythical, are what make Knossos special. You don't need to believe the Minotaur was real to feel its presence. It lingers, not in bone, but in imagination. The Minoan culture seems to vanish from history after its peak, but that vanishing act only deepened its legend. A civilization that flourished, then faded, leaving behind no texts, no records we can fully read. It's the silence that makes it mysterious. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, where scribes detailed the lives of kings, the Minoans let their art and architecture do the talking. And when those voices went quiet, others, the Greeks, the Romans, modern scholars, filled the gap with story. The absence of answers didn't end the tale. It sparked new ones, and ensured Knossos would never be forgotten. There's something deeply human about turning ruins into legends. When we walk through broken halls and scattered stones, we imagine what once was and what could have been. That process is both creative and comforting. We're not just preserving history, we're shaping it into something that matters now. Knossos gave rise to one of the most famous myths in the Western world, not because someone carved it into stone, but because the site felt like it was hiding something. The more mysterious the space, the more powerful the story it creates. That's how myths are born, and why they survive. The Minotaur myth taps into a universal fear being trapped. Whether it's a physical space or an emotional one, the idea of wandering through a maze, hunted by something terrifying, resonates with everyone. And the solution, a thread, something fragile yet guiding, speaks to hope. We don't need brute strength to escape our fears. We need clarity, help and determination. This simple story, told thousands of years ago, still offers insight. It's not just about Theseus or ancient Crete. It's about us, our fears, our monsters, our threads. That's why it's retold again and again. Ariadne's role in the myth is sometimes overshadowed by Theseus, but she's arguably the true hero. She doesn't fight, but she enables victory. Her intelligence and kindness change the outcome. She defies her father, gives up everything, and receives betrayal in return. Her arc is tragic, but powerful. It reflects how support often goes unacknowledged, how those who help us through the maze may be left behind. Over time, her story has evolved. Some say she was rescued by Dionysus, becoming divine. Others see her abandonment as a warning. Either way, Ariadne's thread has become a symbol of faith, foresight, and strength. Knossos isn't the only palace tied to myth, but it's perhaps the most evocative. Other ancient sites hold legends too, but none blend architecture and story quite like this. Maybe it's the scale, the layout, or the artistry. Maybe it's the bull iconography, repeated so often it begged for interpretation. Or maybe it's because the ruins still feel alive. You don't just look at Knossos, you explore it. You get turned around. You wonder what's behind the next column. The place invites narrative, even now. That's why it continues to inspire artists, writers, and dreamers across generations. Though centuries have passed, the questions around Knossos remain as intriguing as ever. Who ruled here? What did the rituals mean? Why did the civilization fall? These aren't just academic puzzles. They're the beating heart of every visit, every documentary, every classroom discussion. The mystery is part of the allure. We want to solve the maze, to uncover what lies at its center. But like many great myths, Knossos may never yield a final answer, and maybe it doesn't need to. Sometimes, mystery itself is the point. The journey through the questions can be more meaningful than the destination. For modern visitors, walking through Knossos is like stepping into a crossroads, past and present, fact and fiction, stone and story. Each corridor offers not just a view of history, but a moment of connection. You're not just looking at what was, you're feeling it. The air, the shadows, the strange echoes, they all create a space where time feels thin. It's not hard to imagine the rustle of robes, the beat of drums, the whisper of fear. Knossos doesn't just tell you a story, it invites you to be part of it, to walk the labyrinth yourself and discover what myths still live within you. While much of Knossos has been studied and reconstructed, parts of it remain untouched, buried, or too fragile to excavate. There's a sense that the palace still holds secrets. What if new rooms are found? What if Linear A is one day deciphered? These aren't idle fantasies. They're very real possibilities. And that's why archaeologists keep returning, generation after generation. Knossos is not a closed chapter. It's an ongoing conversation with the past. Every new discovery, no matter how small, adds to the myth. The more we learn, the more we realize how much remains unknown, and how exciting that is. Ultimately, Knossos is a place where myth and reality blur, not in opposition, but in harmony. The labyrinth may not have housed a literal Minotaur, but it didn't need to. The structure, the culture, the symbolism, all were enough to inspire one of history's richest legends. And that legend gave the ruins new life. They're no longer just stones in the dirt. They're part of a story, one that still matters. As long as we're drawn to tales of courage, mystery, and transformation, Knossos will remain relevant. Because sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones wrapped in myth. Knossos has long captured the attention of artists, poets, and scholars, not just because of what it is, but because of what it represents. It's a symbol of something bigger than stone walls and ruins. It's about discovery, imagination, and the human desire to make sense of the unknown. Every generation that visits or writes about Knossos adds a layer to its legend. Whether through painted canvases, fictional retellings, or academic debates, the story grows richer. That's the beauty of a place like this. It's not frozen in time. It keeps evolving, just like the myths it birthed. Some visitors come to Knossos expecting to find answers. Clear facts, tidy timelines. But that's not what this place offers. Instead, it gives glimpses. A mural here, a symbol there, a staircase that leads nowhere. You walk away with more questions than when you arrived. And that's a good thing. Because Knossos isn't a sight to be solved. It's one to be experienced. It teaches you to be curious, to wonder. It challenges the idea that history is just a list of dates and kings. Here, history feels more like a dream you're trying to remember, with pieces missing and meaning hidden in the gaps. There's something magical about how Knossos bridges the gap between archaeology and storytelling. Excavations revealed rooms, artifacts, and frescoes. But the stories people attach to those findings are what give them weight. A throne isn't just a chair, it's the seat of a king or goddess. A spiral isn't just a design, it's a path inward. We're wired to see stories in shapes and spaces. And Knossos, with its winding halls and cryptic symbols, practically begs us to interpret it. That's why it's more than a historical site. It's a narrative landscape. A place where facts and fiction walk side by side. The legacy of Knossos reminds us that history doesn't need to be complete to be powerful. Even if we never decode Linear A, even if we never uncover the full truth of Minoan life, what we do know still resonates. The artistry, the complexity, the innovation, these leave a mark. They tell us that the people of Knossos were not primitive or forgotten. They were thinkers, builders, dreamers. And even if their names are lost, their ideas live on in every visitor who stops to marvel at a painted wall or wonders who once stepped through a crumbling doorway. Their silence speaks volumes. Some critics argue that Evans's reconstructions at Knossos blur the line between history and fantasy. And they're not wrong. He made bold choices, repainting murals, rebuilding columns, filling in gaps with guesswork. But in doing so, he also made Knossos accessible. He turned ruins into something people could connect with. And yes, some details may be off, but the spirit of the place, the feeling of walking through a myth, remains intact. Evans didn't just uncover a palace. He helped resurrect a story, and sometimes bringing a legend to life requires a little creative risk. Every ancient site has its own rhythm, and Knossos is no different. As you walk through its layered corridors, you start to sense a pattern, a movement between light and shadow, openness and enclosure. It's architectural storytelling. The space isn't just built, it's composed like music. You pass through narrow doorways into grand chambers. You look up and see light shafts cutting through stone. You turn corners and find colors where you didn't expect them. The entire palace feels designed to create mood. It doesn't just house people, it shapes how they feel. And that's the mark of a truly sophisticated civilization. The beauty of Knossos is how it engages not just your eyes, but your imagination. You don't just see where people lived, you picture how they lived. You imagine the sounds footsteps on stone, conversations echoing down hallways, the distant rhythm of drums. You imagine the smells incense, oil, damp earth. It becomes a sensory experience, even in its ruined state. And that's rare. Not many historical sites feel this alive. Knossos isn't preserved in perfect form, but what remains sparks something ancient in us. A sense of wonder, of mystery, of being part of something much older than ourselves. Knossos stands as a testament to how myth and memory can preserve what time tries to erase. Though the Minoan civilization faded, its echo remained, amplified by stories, discoveries, and imagination. The ruins don't explain everything, but they don't have to. They invite each person who visits to fill in the blanks. Some do it with research, others with storytelling. Either way, the effect is the same connection. You walk where others walked. You wonder what they wondered. In that way, Knossos is more than preserved history. It's shared experience, passed down not just in facts, but in feeling. Even in our modern world of digital maps and smart devices, the idea of a labyrinth still unsettles us. It represents disorientation, helplessness, and the fear of not knowing where to go next. That's why the myth of the labyrinth survives. Not because it's ancient, but because it's timeless. We all enter mazes at different points in life: grief, love, change, uncertainty. And we all search for a thread to guide us through. That's why stories like Theseus and the Minotaur still resonate. They remind us that getting lost is human, but so is finding your way out. At Knossos, the story isn't finished. Maybe it never will be. And that's its power. Every visit, every discovery, every new interpretation adds something to the ongoing narrative. The palace may have crumbled, but its legend still stands tall. As long as people seek meaning in ruins, or imagine monsters in the dark, or look for threads to follow, Knossos will endure. It's not just a place. It's a metaphor, a mirror, a challenge, and above all, it's a reminder that the stories we tell, whether carved in stone or whispered in myth, are the ones that truly last. Knossos teaches us that history doesn't have to be fully understood to be meaningful. You can walk its corridors without knowing every detail and still feel something profound. That feeling, the quiet pull of the past, is what keeps people returning. Maybe it's the layout, the art, or just the silence that surrounds the ruins. But something stirs in you there. You realize you're not just studying the past. You're stepping into it. You become part of a continuum, another figure passing through the labyrinth, wondering what came before, and what stories still lie hidden beneath the stone. It's easy to forget that behind the myths and frescoes, real people lived at Knossos. They cooked, argued, danced, prayed, and built lives within those winding halls. They may not have imagined their palace would become the setting for a myth that would last for millennia, but their presence lingers. Every cracked wall, every worn stair holds their memory. You can almost hear their laughter in the courtyards, or their footsteps echoing through passageways. That's the quiet magic of ancient sites. The ability to make you feel like time hasn't really passed, only paused. Knossos doesn't give up its mysteries easily. Some stories feel just out of reach, like a word on the tip of your tongue. You sense meaning in a mural, in the placement of rooms, in the repetition of symbols. But you're left interpreting with limited tools. That ambiguity can be frustrating, but it's also freeing. It lets each person bring their own insight to the ruins. Scholars see ritual patterns. Artists see inspiration. Travelers see magic. The palace becomes a canvas where myth and memory blend, and where not knowing everything is part of the wonder. What's fascinating about the myth of the Minotaur is how it reflects cultural anxiety. A strange hybrid, half man and half beast, trapped in a maze. It speaks to fears of losing control, of confronting something both familiar and alien. The labyrinth isn't just a building, it's a psychological state. The Minotaur isn't just a creature, it's our inner chaos. This myth, born from a real place, grew into a mirror. And the reason it still holds power is because it makes us ask what's in our own labyrinth. What parts of ourselves do we keep locked away, hidden from the world? The labyrinth story also reminds us that solutions don't always come from strength. Theseus defeats the Minotaur not just with a sword, but with a thread, a symbol of strategy, connection, and memory. It's not the battle that saves him, it's the path back. Ariadne's thread becomes one of mythology's most enduring tools. Simple, but vital. It suggests that survival isn't just about bravery. It's about preparation, help, and clarity, and that message transcends time. In any confusing or dark moment, the thread is a reminder that there's always a way forward if you hold on to the right guide. One of the reasons Knossos remains relevant is that it continues to challenge our assumptions. We often picture ancient civilizations as primitive or basic, but the Minoans built multi-story complexes, engineered water systems, and decorated their world with elegance. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. They created a culture of beauty and order, even if we don't fully understand its beliefs. Every painted dolphin, every curving stair speaks to a love of design and rhythm. Knossos humbles us. It reminds us that progress isn't linear, and that greatness can emerge in forgotten corners of history. There's also something poetic about how the Minoan civilization disappeared. It wasn't destroyed in a single blaze, but faded across time. Earthquakes, invasions, maybe climate shifts. No one knows for sure, but its legacy endured, not through documents or empire, but through story. That kind of survival is rare. It shows that culture isn't just about power or wealth. It's about resonance. The Minoans may have vanished from the world stage, but they never left our imagination. And in some ways, that's the more lasting kind of immortality, to live on in myth, long after your buildings fall. Knossos, with all its complexity, isn't just a place of the past. It's a reminder of how we relate to the past. We don't just uncover ruins, we reinterpret them. We project meaning, we weave stories, we connect dots that may or may not have been meant to connect. That's part of being human. We crave narrative, even in broken stones. And Knossos gives us plenty to work with. It's like a half-finished sentence left by history, inviting us to complete it. Whether we do so with facts, feelings, or fantasies, we become part of the ongoing myth that Knossos inspires. Even if one day we unlock every secret of Knossos, decipher the language, map every room, understand every ritual, it will still be magical, because the experience of being there transcends knowledge. You don't need to read ancient Minoan to feel the weight of history in your chest as you walk its paths. You don't need to be a scholar to sense that something extraordinary happened here. Knossos is a place that speaks in mood as much as meaning. It doesn't need to explain itself completely. It just needs to be felt. And once it's felt, it stays with you. In the end, Knossos is more than ruins, more than myth. It's a lesson. It teaches us that even when cultures disappear, they don't have to be lost. As long as their echoes remain, in art, in architecture, in story, they can still speak to us. The Minoans didn't leave behind epic poems or conquests carved in stone, but they left impressions, symbols, emotions, and those speak louder than any chronicle. Knossos is the proof that legacy isn't always about dominance. Sometimes it's about mystery, beauty, and the power of a well-told story, even if that story is still unfolding. Even though Knossos has been studied for over a century, its deeper meanings are still emerging. New tools, technologies, and perspectives continue to shift how we understand the site. What once looked like a throne room might turn out to be a shrine. What was called a storage area could have hosted rituals. This evolving understanding reminds us that history isn't static. Our interpretations change as we do. Knossos invites reinterpretation, not because it's vague, but because it's rich. It's not just a ruin to be preserved. It's a dialogue with the past, constantly updated as we ask better questions. The palace's art offers perhaps the clearest glimpse into Minoan life, full of motion, colour, and nature. Unlike other ancient cultures that focused on battles and gods of war, Minoan murals show festivals, dancing, and peaceful animals. It paints a society that, at least in its artistic expression, celebrated joy and vitality. Even the famous bull-leaping scenes, dangerous as they look, are filled with grace rather than violence. It's easy to romanticize this, and perhaps we do. But still, the art tells us something. The Minoans valued life's rhythm, and Knossos reflected that energy. One detail that often strikes visitors is the presence of women in Minoan art. They're not just background figures. They stand front and center, dressed elaborately, leading rituals, perhaps even ruling. While we can't be certain of gender roles in Minoan society, the imagery suggests women held significant power. Priestesses, queens, or goddesses, they appear confident, engaged, respected. This contrasts sharply with many neighboring cultures, where women were often hidden or passive. Knossos challenges assumptions. It hints that a more balanced world may have existed, or at least been imagined, long before we expected. The palace's structure reveals how thoughtfully the Minoans organized their world. It wasn't just a jumble of rooms. It had levels, flows, natural light, and air circulation. Some believe it even separated ceremonial areas from domestic ones, suggesting clear distinctions between sacred and everyday life. These design choices weren't random. They show intention, an understanding of how space influences behavior. Knossos wasn't just where people lived, it was how they lived. The layout itself may have reflected their belief cycles, renewal, harmony with nature. It's a philosophy written in walls and windows. It's tempting to see Knossos only through the lens of the Minotaur myth, but its story is far greater than that single narrative. The palace wasn't built to house a monster. It was built to reflect a worldview. Light shafts aligned with the sun. Courtyards hosted communal events. Storage rooms held vast quantities of oil and grain, hinting at both wealth and complexity. The myth may have added drama, but the real Knossos tells a quieter, more profound story of a society organized, artistic, and sophisticated. The legend grabs attention, but the truth deserves just as much awe. As more of the site is explored, we're reminded that Knossos is still a work in progress, not just in excavation, but in meaning. Each discovery reshapes the narrative. An unusual artifact, a new inscription, a different interpretation of a mural. They all add depth. And because the Minoans didn't leave behind clear written records, our picture will likely always be partial. But that's not a flaw. It's what makes Knossos so endlessly captivating. It invites us to wonder, to speculate, to imagine. The lack of certainty doesn't weaken the story. It keeps it alive, like an open-ended myth. Knossos isn't just an archaeological site. It's a crossroads where science, myth, and memory meet. Historians bring the tools of analysis. Artists bring interpretation. Visitors bring emotion. Together, they create a multi-layered experience. The labyrinth may not have existed as described, but it has taken on a life of its own. It represents something real, the human urge to explore, to uncover, to navigate through confusion toward understanding. That's why Knossos still matters. It mirrors our internal landscapes, full of turns, shadows, and, if we're lucky, a thread leading us forward. From the time of Homer to modern travelers, Knossos has remained a source of fascination. Its story has been rewritten by every era. Romans saw it one way, medieval scholars another, and today's archaeologists another still. Each generation brings new questions and fresh interpretations. But the core remains a place of wonder, complexity, and beauty. Whether you view it as a historical puzzle, a mythical stage, or a personal journey, Knossos delivers. It holds a mirror to whoever walks its halls, reflecting not only the Minoans but ourselves, shaped by what we choose to see. As you exit the site, there's often a strange feeling, like you're leaving something unfinished. That's part of Knossos' charm. It doesn't resolve neatly. It lingers. You think about the rooms you missed, the meanings you might have misunderstood, the people who once stood where you stood. That lingering is the sign of a powerful story, one that doesn't end when you close the book or leave the site. It follows you quietly, in thoughts, in dreams, in the way you now look at ancient things not as dead, but dreaming, waiting for someone curious enough to ask them to speak. And so, the labyrinth continues, not as stone walls or underground tunnels, but as a living idea, a myth passed down, reshaped and rediscovered. Knossos stands at its center, a monument to memory, not because it explains everything, but because it invites us to ask. Its corridors may have crumbled, but its story has never collapsed. In every retelling, the thread winds on, through history books, children's tales, museum halls, and quiet minds. And with each step, we come a little closer to the truth, that the most enduring stories are not those we solve, but those we keep walking through.